Lost Farms Homestead. It's the morning of November 27, 2021. I'm sitting here at the house in town in the office and thinking about the last video that we did on the property. We were talking about storing food and putting food away for hard times. And I think that's really kind of a big deal right now with everything that's going on with with other countries and with this whole COVID thing and with all of these lockdowns that are happening. And then if we're paying attention to anything that's happening in other countries, their food sources are being bought up and shipped out, and they're just doing weird things with the food system right now. And I'm a little concerned with everything that's going on right now with all of these countries doing the things that they're doing, and with the local farms and the small farms being shut down in the States here, and with everything that's happening. And then we have everything is set up on this like just-in-time shipping system where the trucks come in just in time to fill up the stores, and then it gets sold, and then it comes in just in time to restock it. And that system to me is very fragile, and it just seems like with everything with the trucking and with getting shipments in and the whole containers out on the water issue and all of those things, if you've been watching the news, you know what I'm talking about. So with all of that stuff happening, it's concerning to me that we're going to walk into the grocery store one day and there's not going to be anything on the shelves. So I'm saying, for me, I think it's a good time right now to be stocking up food and to be putting it away, like stored in a closet or in a storage area or wherever you can, wherever you have space for it. So, but before we get into food storage, I think we should talk a little bit about water, because, you know, if you think about anything about survival or preparedness or any of those kinds of things, they have a thing in those cultures that's called the rule of threes, and pretty much it consists of a person can live for 3 minutes without air, for 3 days without water, and for 3 weeks without food. Now, just as a note on that, when they say 3 weeks without food, I'm saying you'll be alive, but you're probably not doing a whole lot of stuff. You're probably laying on the ground completely emaciated and you know, not doing anything. So, and that's at the point where your organs start shutting down and you start having serious issues. But living, not well. That's permanent damage at that point. But anyways, the point being, 3 days without water. And also, along with that, most food sources require water to prepare. So if you have food stored away, but you don't have water, a lot of the stuff you can't prepare. So especially if you do like beans, rice, pasta, any of that kind of stuff, which is really the staples of food being put away, if you don't have water, you can't prepare it. So you're going to want to be storing water. So as far as water goes, the best formula that I've found thus far for calculating the hydration requirements of a person is if you take the body weight of that person, divide it by 2, and then convert that into ounces. That's how many ounces of water a person needs per day. So if you figure a 200-pound person, just about like 198-ish, something like that, a 200-pound person divided in half is 100, so about 100 ounces a day is what I would require to stay hydrated the way that I should be. And that's about 3 32-ounce containers. That's kind of about what I drink generally, as long as, you know, it's a normal day. Sometimes things get crazy and you know, forget, or you get busy or whatever, but on a regular day, I drink about 3 32-ounce bottles, about 100 ounces. of water a day, and that's about where it should be. So that 332 ounces is just about a gallon. I would suggest a gallon a day per person, and that is just for drinking and for food prep. Now, if you're in a situation when things go sideways, where you don't have water, like if you're on utilities, and say for instance, I don't know, whatever, grid down, something happens and there's no power and the pumping station stops pumping water to your house, now you don't have water. So if you're in a situation where, like, there's a lot of places like Pacific Northwest where you can get water, there's water readily available everywhere up there, it falls from the sky nonstop, so that's a situation. But if you're like in the Southwest desert or High Plains desert somewhere, that's going to be a bit more of an issue. So if you're storing water, I would say a gallon per person per day of potable water, drinking water. And I would also add to that at least 2, possibly 3 gallons per person.
Sorry.
Oh, wife's backfired.
Sorry.
All good, love. So I would add an extra 2 to 3 gallons per person per day just for sanitizing, cleaning, because I mean you cook in pots and pans, you got to clean them every day. You got to bathe, you got to stay clean, yeah, all of that stuff. So I would include 2 to 3 gallons per person per day of just water. So, and then there's other things that you can do in that situation too. Like for instance, if you know that the water is going to go out, the first thing that you should do in that situation while the water is still running is go plug up all of your sinks and all of your bathtubs and fill them all full of water. Just fill them all the way up, and then that way you can bucket out a little bit at a time what you need, and it'll get you far enough to where you can at least start to figure out what to do once you get past that point. So anyways, getting a little deep here, kind of in the weeds, I apologize. So right, so if you're in an urban setting, if you're in a rural setting where you're out away from the city and you're on a well, typically if you're on a well, you shouldn't really have so much of a problem with water, as long as your source water is good. If you're sharing a well with other people and things get real ugly, you want to make sure that you have a good relationship with the people that you share a well with. That is a big deal. And the other thing that you should take into consideration as far as wells go is that the pump is electric and it will need to be able to run in order to continue to provide water. So if something happens, as long as you have power to the well, you should be fine. It's always a good idea to have a backup source, possibly solar, gasoline generator, whatever you need in order to run that pump, because water is a big deal. So
Water is life.
Yeah, water is life. So let's go in the garage and we'll talk a little bit about water storage, how to store it, what to store it in, storage conditions, those kinds of things. So let's go check that out for a moment. Okay, so we're going to talk about storing water. So I recommend that you store enough water for 3 weeks, just in case if something happens and you don't have water for 3 weeks, you'll have it stored. For a 4-person family, that's about 84 gallons of water. So you can store water in several different ways. You can store in a 55-gallon drum, 5-gallon carboys. They have the cubes, and these cubes have these little faucet tips that you can get for them. You just bust out this piece and screw it right into there. 5-gallon carboys, the little round ones here. 1-gallon jugs or the 16-ounce bottles by the case. So in order to store 84 gallons of water, you'll need about 28 cases of the 16-ounce, or 84 of the 1 gallons, or 17 of the 5 gallons. If you go with the 5s, you're going to need about 17 of those. Or you could do a mixture of those with the 55. If you do 55, you could go with 155 and then 10 cases of the 16 ounce, or you could go with the 55 and 6 of the 5 gallons, or 30 of the 1 gallons, or you could do any kind of a mix and match of however those go together in order to make it right around 84 gallons, whichever works best for you for space and for wherever you're going to store it at. I do not recommend storing water in the 16 ounce bottles or in the 1 gallon jugs for longer than a few months at a time. If you're going to store them that way, you're going to want to cycle them out every month or so, because the plastic on these is not made to store for long periods of time. Your 55 gallons and these ones here, these are made to store for long term. So you'll be able to use these for long term, but these ones you're going to want to cycle out. So also you can get larger storage. You can get IBC totes around 250, 335. You can also get large above water,
I like that one.
above ground and below ground cisterns for water storage as well. So, but just for household in town kind of a thing, I would recommend a 55 gallon plus whatever works for you in the smaller ones. These are nice to have just because they're
Convenient.
single serve, so you can just grab one and go with it. Also, if you have to leave your home and you can't bring the big stuff with you, these are good for taking in that sense, because you can grab 2 or 3 of them and throw them in your bag and leave. So, all right, so that's storing water. So back in the office, so I want to talk a little bit about water filtration. So if for whatever reason you're not able to store water or not able to store enough water, it's a good idea to have a few different ways to treat water. So the most basic way to treat water is to boil it. So boiling is going to be the least expensive and the safest way to purify water. So boiling is sufficient to kill it'll kill all of the pathogenic bacteria, viruses, and protozoa that is in any water. If it's cloudy, the best thing to do is to let it stand until all of the silt and whatever gets down to the bottom, and then pour the water off the top and run it through a filter like a coffee filter, or any kind of a fine filter that you have, a rag, even if that's all you have. Run it through a rag or a cloth towel or something, and get it into a container and then boil it. So you wanna bring it to a boil, like a rolling boil, and let it boil for at least a minute, and that should purify as far as viruses and bacteria. Now, that's not going to do anything for chemical, like if it has chemicals in it or any other kind of a thing like that. Boiling will not take out chemicals from water. So you want to make sure.
Distillation might.
Yeah, you might be able to do it by distilling it, but yeah, I wasn't really going to get too much into distillation though. I mean, just basics, so like boiling is a good way to do it. Filtration is a good way. I recommend we keep a Zen filter in our kitchen, and we have a RO system in the house that we had installed when we moved in, and so all of our water goes through the standard filter, and then it goes through a drinking filter at the tap. So it comes out of the tap from a filter, and then we take that water and then put that into the Zen, and it runs through the Zen filter, and that's what we use for our drinking water. So, I mean, it may be a little extreme to some people, but that's just the way that we like to do it. So, water should not have a taste. So,
Ever.
right. So, but I recommend keeping some kind of a water filtration system in your house that's separate from your tap water. Like a Zen or a Berkey is a really good one. Berkey makes a really good filter system, but they're kind of expensive. I mean, they go right about $350, $400 for the little ones. So I think you can find a little one. I think Amazon has the little ones for like $2.99 or something like that. They're not too bad, but it's worth the investment to be able to drink clean water. So, and I believe those are the ones where you can just take water right out of a river, dump it in it, and in like 5 minutes you got clean drinking water. So
I think it's like an hour, but yeah.
yeah, but I mean, however long, whatever it is, regardless, the being able to have good drinking water is a big deal. So, but also there are some other ways. There's these guys here. So this is the Sawyer Mini. It's the squeeze filtration system, and it runs it through a filter. You suck it up through here, run it through the filter into the bag, and it'll fill it. And it's my understanding that this little guy here will filter up to 10,000 gallons of water before it's no good anymore, which is quite a bit for a little thing like this. This is the one that I keep in my go bag. So this is part of my water filtration system for the go bag. And also included with this, we have these guys here. So this is chemical treatment, and it's just water purification. And it's got a PA plus in it. So the first one takes away all of the bad stuff, and then the second one cleans it up and makes it more drinkable for you. But so this little thing here will purify up to 25 quarts. So and this also goes in my go bag, so that's what we keep for that. And again, neither of these, I don't believe, the Sawyer might take out chemical, I'm not sure. I would double check that before I would use it that way. I'm assuming we're just going to pull water from a river or a stream and use it that way if we need to. So that's what I'm thinking. I don't think there's going to be any chemicals. It's not like I'm going to be pulling it from a mud puddle next to a, automobile or something. So,
Ew.
right. So I'm pretty sure those will be good for that. So, anyway, so the other thing that you can do is you can use bleach. Now, I would make this like a last resort, way out at the end. I don't like the idea of messing around with bleach. Now, all of the water that you're going to get from the city is going to be chlorinated, kind of pretty much in the same way. But if you it's my understanding that by adding 1 teaspoon of bleach to 5 gallons of water, shake it up, and let it sit for 20 to 30 minutes to disperse and do whatever it needs to do. My understanding is that will kill all of the virus and protozoa and whatever else that's in it, bacteria, all of that stuff, so that you can drink it. Now again, that doesn't do anything for chemical. Excuse me. So, but if it absolutely came down to it, that is an option. If you're stuck in your house, if it's a bad situation and you're sheltering in place and you need to have clean drinking water, that's one way to do it. So now, also a side note on bleach. Do not use the concentrated bleach. It needs to be non-concentrated, non-scented bleach. So just as maybe, I don't know if while you're buying bleach, maybe you pay a little bit of attention and buy that as a just in case, and then when you have it stored away, that's what, if it comes to that, it's usable. So just something to think about. All right, so let's talk a little bit about food storage preparation. So storing food for a prolonged situation where food's not available is kind of pretty much what we're talking about. So there are several ways to do this. So there are pretty much 3 different types of food storage. When you break it down, there's 3 different types. You have your immediate food, you have your short-term food, and you have your long-term food. So your immediate food items are going to be like refrigerator items, fresh fruit and vegetables, things that will not store for longer than a day or 2. So these items, if you're in a good situation and you have a garden or orchards or vineyards or anything like that, you're going to have a constant supply of immediate food items, chickens with eggs, goats, cows with milk, sheep, meat sources, things like that. Any of that kind of stuff is going to be immediate food items. Now, it's always a good idea to have sources for that, to have a garden, to have an orchard, to have livestock, all of that. Excuse me. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, didn't mean to be slurpy. I'm slurping. Okay. Anyways, so that's your first one, is going to be all of your immediate food items. So those, you can't really store those. Sometimes you can refrigerate them and get them by for a couple of days. But I mean, if we're talking about like a grid down situation where you don't have a refrigerator, you don't have a freezer, you're going to need to consume those immediately or get rid of them because they'll go bad quickly. So that's kind of the point that we're looking at right now, is we're talking about storing food for a grid down type of a situation. So the first ones you're going to want to handle is going to be your immediate food items. After that, you're going to have your short-term food items. So this is going to be like your like 2 to 3 year shelf life items, like pasta, like canned foods, grains, whole grains, things like that you store just like in, little sealable things, whatever, pantry items, just your basic pantry items that'll last for 1 to 2 years in a pantry. So those are your short-term food items. And then after that, you have long-term food items. So these are the ones that you put away that you can store for 15 to 20 years, like long-term food items. And there's a way to do that, and we're going to go through that today. I'm going to show you how to pack food and to be able to put it away for long periods of time. So that's what we're doing today. Okay, so we're going to be storing hard red and hard white wheat today in 5-gallon buckets with lids, and we're going to put it in some Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, and we're going to use the hair flattener to seal the top of the bags. So, all right, so the average work age male doing normal work day activities uses about 3,200 calories per day in energy. So it's suggested that in order to provide that number of calories, you should store about 64 pounds of whole grains per person per month. And those grains should be divided up 4 ways between wheat, rice, corn, and beans. And you can store approximately 48 to 50 pounds of each of these in 2 5-gallon buckets, and that should support 3 people for 1 month each on that particular grain. So you would need to do 2 5-gallon buckets of each type of grain for 3 people for 1 month. So so you need 8 buckets total per month for 3 people equals 24 buckets for 3 months, and about 96 buckets for a whole year. I do suggest packing bouillon with rice and beans. I suggest packing bouillon. Like you should, when you seal the top of the Mylar and push it down into the bucket, on top of it, put bouillon, salt, some kind of seasoning, because rice and beans are going to be very bland and probably won't taste very good. You'll get tired of them very quickly.
Cajun is cheap too.
Yeah, Cajun seasoning is very, very good to put with it, if that's one of the things that you like. Also, on a side note, corn, when you're storing whole grain corn, You will need to put it through a process that's called nixtamalization before you can actually use it, and that's basically you just soak it in a lime water brine kind of a thing to strip away all of the toxins that are in it before you can use it. So we'll talk more about nixtamalization, or you can just look it up. It's nixtamalization. Nixtamalization. You can find it online. Just look it up. So, anyways, so we're gonna get on this, but before we do, I want to talk about milling your own grain. So we're gonna talk about that for a minute, and then we'll get right back to it. So, all right. So before we get into storing the wheat, I'd like to talk a little bit about milling your own flour. So there's a few things that you should know about milling flour before you decide to do this. This is kind of a large step and a bit of an undertaking. So one thing is that 1 cup of berries, when put through a mill, equals about 2 cups of flour, but it's going to be kind of airy because when you run it through the mill, it's going to collect a bunch of air and it puffs down. So you're going to want to let it settle for about 20-30 minutes before you use it, or pack it more tightly into your measuring cups before you use it. So another thing, 1 12-slice loaf of bread requires 2 to 2 3/4 cups of flour. So you'll be doing like probably 2 cups of berries for each loaf of bread, plus or minus. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Also, there are some pros and cons to milling your own flour. So one of the things is going to be that freshly milled flour is going to be more nutritious than store-bought flour, because as soon as you break the husk open and expose the flour to the air, the nutrients immediately start coming out. So store-bought flour has been milled and is put aside, and it's been exposed for all of that time, however long it's been sitting there, and all of those nutrients have come out of it. So freshly milled flour is going to have more nutrients in it because it's fresh. So also another thing is that currently right now, wheat berries, pound for pound from what you get from the store and what you get after milling, pound for pound of flour, right now the wheat berries are less expensive than the flour. So that's a good thing. Also, freshly milled flour has a better taste, better flavor, adds better flavor to your breads. The taste is more present, more better. Another thing is that by adjusting the coarseness or the fineness of your mill, when you run the berries through, you can adjust the coarseness and fineness of the flour that you're producing. So normally, if you have a recipe that requires a certain type of flour, you have to go to the store and buy that type of flour. Whereas this way, when you're milling it, you just adjust it at the time or run it through additional times for finer, and you can produce flour that is the coarseness or fineness that you need for that recipe. Excuse me. So also, wheat berries have a much longer shelf life than flour, and if you're storing it, I'm going to show you here in a moment how to store wheat berries, and if you do it properly, I believe that wheat berries stored properly have an indefinite shelf life, like they'll last forever if you do it right. So also, when milling your own flour, you actually get the whole grain of the wheat, because store-bought flour is mechanically rolled when it's milled, and the husk comes off and a lot of the parts are sifted out of it, and you lose a lot of the actual whole wheat when you get flour. Whereas when you mill it yourself, you're going to get all of that. That's all going to be included in it when you get your flour. So, the other thing is that in a grid down situation, if you have a hand crank roller mill and you have wheat berries, for as long as you have wheat berries, you will have flour, regardless of what's going on. So, I mean, because you don't need power to run it. So, there are a few other things that you want to think about that might not be so great about milling your own flour. So, one of the things you want to think about is that baking with freshly milled flour, there's a learning curve to it because it doesn't work the same way as store-bought flour. Store-bought flour is milled a specific way and then stored for long periods of time, and then when you get it, it's set up a certain way so that it's consistent every time you use it. Whereas freshly milled flour is going to act differently depending on how fine it is, how coarse it is, and other factors factor into it. It's just going to be less consistent than store-bought flour when baking with it. Another thing is that the availability and cost may increase when if you don't store it now while it's inexpensive, but you have a mill, and then you try to get the grain later when things are in a pinch and the availability is more low, it may be more expensive then. So that's another thing to think about. Another thing is that if you're going to be baking something that requires flour, it will add time to your prep time because you'll actually have to go and pull the berries and run them through the mill and do all of that before you can actually start baking. So that's another thing. And then the last thing that I can think of that you might consider is the initial investment to buy the mill. Now, you can get a mechanical mill or an electrical mill. They're kind of expensive, depending. I'm sure you can get one that's not too expensive, but the issue with that is, like, if you're in a grid down situation, an electric mill is going to do you no good. You can't run it without power. So I suggest a hand mill, a hand crank mill, a little bit of elbow grease, no problem. So, but there is an initial investment to get the mill, and some of those can be expensive. I think I saw one on Amazon that was right around $60, and that's not too bad considering, but they go up towards $200, $300, $400 for really nice ones. But for me personally, I don't think that's all necessary. So, but so there are different types of wheat berry that you can get. We're going to be using hard white and hard red wheat berries. So the hard white, when made into flour, is good for baking bread or higher gluten content types of breads with the sweeter, lighter kind of a flavor. Whereas the hard red wheat is going to be more for like the dense types of breads, like flatbreads or tortillas or things like that. So that's where you're going to want to use that. The soft white is good for pastries, softer breads, things like that. And we're not using the soft white. I don't have any of that right now, but that's what that's good for. You can also find, like, there's einkorn, Khorasan, emmer, spelt, rye. There's all different kinds of grains that you can get and use. You can also use like corn kernels or dried chickpeas or dried peas or lentils. You can use any of those kinds of things and turn it into flour. So for use in whatever. So, but anyways, so lots of different kinds. There's pros and cons to it, and yeah. So I just wanted to throw that out before we got too far into it. So one other thing. So excuse me. So storing freshly milled flour. Okay. So freshly milled flour can be stored Okay. Yep. So, storing wheat berries. Wheat berries can be stored indefinitely in a cool, dry place in buckets with Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers. I'm going to show you how to do that here in a moment. Freshly ground flour can be stored in a plastic bag at room temperature for up to 3 days, or you can store it in the refrigerator for up to 7 days, or if you freeze it, you can put it in the freezer and store it in the freezer for up to 6 months, and it'll stay good. So when milling it, you can use a coffee grinder or a food processor. I would suggest getting a flour mill like we talked about, like a hand crank flour mill. Using a coffee grinder or a food processor will give you an uneven grind, and it'll be the coarseness will be uneven throughout. And the other thing is with those types of machines or whatever, you can't get a super fine grind because those are not made for super fine. So if you want to be able to do super fine, you're going to need to get a flour mill. The other thing is that with a mill, you can choose the texture that you want it, from coarse all the way to super fine. It's fast and efficient to do it. Just crank it, and you can do larger amounts at a time. So I suggest getting a mill. If you're going to do this, I suggest getting a mill. So when using freshly milled flour, as I was saying before, it doesn't act the same as store-bought flour. So one of the things, freshly milled flour is more absorbent. It absorbs more water than store-bought. So you can expect to add probably about 3 teaspoons of extra water per cup of flour, just because it's going to absorb it a lot faster and a lot more. Also, it ferments faster. So if you're doing like a sourdough where you need to start a base and let it rise, or if once your base is set up and you're letting it rise, it's going to go a lot faster. So you're going to want to adjust your time frame to accommodate that. So also, it'll have smaller air holes in the bread, and it'll be more dense when you bake it. So you're going to want to adjust for the texture of your bread however you want it. So experimenting is a good thing. So excuse me. So your results will vary based on how closely you monitor the dough during fermentation. So yeah, just watching it and making it do what you want it to. So again, experimentation. So the other thing is that freshly ground, freshly milled flour is going to take up more volume for the same weight. So because of the air, right? Same thing. So it'll be more volume, but it'll be the same weight. So where with store-bought you would have 1 cup, with freshly milled you're going to have about 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons plus or minus. Also, if it's freshly milled, when it comes right out of the mill, it's going to be warm because it comes right out of the mill. So it might adjust the temperature during fermentation. So you're also going to want to take that into consideration. So, all right, I think that about covers it for freshly milled flour. So I think we can move on to the actual storing of it. So let's go in the garage and get this going. All right, so what we're gonna do put these buckets out in the row here. If I can get them apart.
Maybe.
There we go. Alright, so typically we get our buckets here. Typically, this is what we get, and it comes from Uline. And we don't have these right now. We weren't able to get them in time to do this video. So instead of these, I picked these ones up, and I just got these from Winco. So a little more expensive.
But as long as they're food grade, they're fine.
Right, a little more expensive, but they are food grade, and they will work for what we're doing. So I want to line all of these buckets, this row, and then I want to pull this out here, and then I want to take one of these guys. These have edges on them like this from where they fold out flat, and the best way that I've found to do this is to use your straightener.
Yes.
Straightener.
He's a guy. He don't know.
Just kind of run it down this edge, and it seals the Mylar together. Oh, that's hot. Like this. And just kind of bring it down the edge a few times. Make sure it's nice and see. So you can see here it's sealed and goes right to it like that. And that's a pretty good seal. So if we just continue sealing this down until we have a little bit left right here. And then at this point, what I want to do is, now I'm going to open these, but I want to drop two inside here and the rest of them in here, seal it, push as much air as I can out, and then seal this little bit. So this part you want to try and do as quickly as you can. Don't concern too much about it because it'll seal anyways and it'll all be okay, but I mean, you don't want to just leave it wide open for minutes at a time. So is really the main thing. So, all right. So I want to drop two of these in here, and that'll take up 200 cc's. And then I want the rest of these in here as quickly as possible as I spill them all over the floor. And I don't even know if these are all going to fit in here. Now that I'm looking at it, I hope they do. Alright, so I'm getting dirt all over them. Oops. Okay.
Looks like they'll fit fine.
Yeah, I think so. Hope so.
You trying to be punny?
Punny? Okay. And seal that as quickly as possible. Okay. So those should not lose anymore. And then this guy, what we want to do is push it down to get as much air as we can out of it, and then seal this last little part right here.
You want a straw to suck the last little bit out?
No, the oxygen absorbers should be able to take up that last little bit. I mean, they'll take up 200 cubic centimeters, which is actually kind of a lot. So they should suck up the last of that. So that one is good right now. for a second. So my understanding of storing food like this is that you can take, again, my understanding is you can take just a plastic bag.
Like a trash bag.
Like a trash bag, and put all of this in it and twist it, and then twist tie it, stick it inside of here, and put the lid on, and it'll keep for 10 years, 10, 15 years, which is a good, you know, distance out. Hopefully, you know, you won't need it. But if it ever comes to it and you do need it, it'll be good for 10, 15 years. Now, sealing this with the Mylar airtight and then putting the lid on it and sealing it that way, my understanding is that these are good up to 20, 25 years. Now, I could be wrong. I don't know that it's ever been tested or whatever. I'm sure that it has, or else it wouldn't say that. Now, of course, my source I'm going to cite is the internet, so you know how reliable that is. So, but it is my understanding that this type of sealing is good for 20 to 25 years.
I think Independent talks about it too.
I believe he does in his, but I'm not sure what number he said. I'm not going to try to quote him without actually doing the research, but he does talk about doing this same exact thing. But again, I think he was, I don't know exactly what numbers he was calling for how long they last. So anyways, last step is to put the lids on. Now,
Next step, not the last step.
yeah, the next step.
You definitely want to label.
Yes.
Label.
Yes.
Because you don't want to open wheat, then get mac and cheese.
Crap.
The two in front close to you are red.
Red, white. Got it. So now I should have, thank you. I should have a mallet specifically for this to tap these down, but I do not have that mallet. So typically what I do is I'll get it started and then just go around and push it until it clicks. And as long as it clicks, I believe we are good. And just for good measure, I'm going to take this guy. Some hard white.
Sorry.
Wheat. All right. All right. Mylar vacuum sealed 125 pounds of hard red and white wheat. All right, so now that we've got all of the buckets put together and everything in there and packed the way that it's supposed to be, we're going to store it, and I've got a closet space that I'm going to put it in, but there are a few different things that you're going to want to consider when storing the buckets. The first thing you're going to want to consider is temperature. So you're going to want to store it at the ideal temperature is 70 to 75 degrees. So room temperature you're going to want to store it at, or lower. Lower is better. Not freezing, but you know, between that. Storing at a higher temperature will reduce the shelf life. So you want to store it at or below 70 to 75 degrees. You want to consider moisture. Don't store it in a place where you're going to get moisture. Moisture will cause food to spoil. You want to use oxygen absorbers to absorb all the oxygen and keep the oxygen out of the air inside of there. Also, you should keep the buckets off the floor and allow space all the way around for airflow to minimize any condensation or moisture inside of the buckets. You do not want to get moisture inside of the buckets. You want to consider sunlight. So the sunlight can promote bacteria growth. That's mostly like in water, but if it's getting direct sunlight, that's going to be a problem. It will reduce the shelf life. It will promote growth of bacteria and other things in your food, and you don't want that. So you want to store it in a dark place where it does not get direct or indirect sunlight. So, and then the other thing that you want to consider is pests. So you want to monitor the area where you're storing your food all the time. Often anyways, I guess not all the time, but like at least weekly. Check your area, make sure everything is clean. If you see any rodent droppings, you want to set traps and get rid of that problem as quickly as possible. You do not want rodents in your food. That's all bad. Bugs, keep an eye out for bugs. And you just want to monitor it and keep pests away as best possible. As soon as you notice a situation, clean it up immediately. Like pull everything out, clean it all out, set your traps, put it all back. So, but all right. So I think that about covers storing wheat berries. If you think I missed anything, put it in the comments and I'll address it. If you'd like to see more videos about this kind of stuff, also please put in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.